Hello everyone, hope you're all safe and well. Thanks for joining my YouTube channel and welcome to this new venture of ours, new exodus I would say, of us read your Bible through a year program, in a year program. Thanks for joining. And as I told you, this journey we will be making together. In 1 year we would have finished the whole Bible. For a detailed introduction, you can watch my previous program, how I'm going to what we are going to do in the coming years. And before I forget, don't forget to subscribe this channel and click on that bell icon so that you get the updates. Please feel free to send me messages, your comments, and if you have any questions. As I said, I can't give a detailed explanation because I want to keep the introduction as small as possible so that you will be able to spend more time on reading the Bible. My main idea is to just give an introduction about the books, and then every time I'll just give some introduction to the that part of study which we are going to do. So let's start go straight. Initially the introduction to the books might take slightly longer, but as we go, in between the books, it will be fairly straightforward. So let's start with the first book of our Bible in the Old Testament, which is called as the book of Genesis. So book of Genesis, in Greek it is called as the Bereshit. Sorry, excuse my Greek. The Hebrew name Genesis Bereshit means in the beginning, and also the Septuagint is the early Hebrew Greek translation of the Bible. It starts as says Genesis, which also means the beginning. So this is only divine inspired source of information about the events which predated Moses. The first part of the book describes key events in the early history of man. The remainder of the book records the history of the patriarchs like Abraham. Then we talk about Adam and Eve and Noah and all those people. They are patriarchs. It talks about them. And so it's not a scientific study, it's not a technical study, I would say. It's a divine inspiration. It says about Genesis is which declares that all things were designed and created by God and continue to operate within the boundary of His purpose. So where did Moses get all these informations when Genesis doesn't mention that Moses is the author of this book? As you all know, Moses was brought up in the palaces of Pharaoh, so he must have been well read, or well traveled. So he must have traveled to lots of places, kingdoms during his life. So he must have known what are the stories. For example, the flood of during the Noah is also mentioned in Babylonian texts. So we know Moses could have got lots of sources of information to compile this. This book is a very appropriate book as the introduction to the whole Bible, both the Old Testament and the New Testament. And this is the first book of Pentateuch. Pentateuch is the first 5 books, the book of law, it provides answers to the question of the origin of the universe, how the universe came into being, the evil things. It comprises of 50 chapters. It gives the much half of the human history as such, so how the universe came into being and etc. So it's worth reading Genesis to know a good idea about all those things. Now, going to book itself, on the first day we will be reading the first chapter 1, chapter 2 and chapter 3 of book of Genesis, and chapter 1 of the Gospel of Matthew in the New Testament. So the beginning, the chapter 1 talks about how God created this universe in 6 days. So it's a detailed account of what happened in each of the days. Well, where does this 6-day theory come from? There are lots of theory which are put forward by the various group of people. The first theory being recreation. It's called as a pictorial day theory. The pictorial day theory means this is how God explained to Moses, or told Moses how the creation was made. It took him 6 days, that's what they say, during which God revealed to Moses the events of creation. The second theory is the gap theory. Gap theory is describes an original creation which was followed by the fall of Satan and the great divine judgment. So the Lucifer and his followers were fallen angels. After that, God had to reorganize this universe. So that is the gap theory. So the chapter 1 of book of Genesis is basically the reorganizing of the universe after the fall of angels. The third one is intermittent day theory. So the intermittent day theory is the gap between the day 1 and day 2 is a long period of time. It's not like how you have today, tomorrow, day after. So intermittent day theory says day 1, the time between day 1 and day 2 would have been a long period of time. And the other theory is day age theory. The day age theory is when you say day, it is not just 24 hours a day what we think about. It is a day could have been a longer time than what we have now, the 24 hours. So it's a longer day theory. So that is called as a day age theory. Then literal day theory. Literal day theory is what we perceive as one day, which is day and night is one day. So that is literal day theory. So these are some of the theories which exist. Scientifically, there are lots of arguments to this this evolution. Like scientific evolution will say what is told in the creation is completely against the evolution. So in the evolution theory, this cannot happen. Like God creates the vegetations and then the light. But according to the evolution, that is not possible. In order for the plants to survive, it needs sunlight, so to create the photosynthesis. So it is against the evolution theory. So these are some of the things which is there. But whatever it is, please read through this, and I would recommend you can have a notebook and write your own reflections. And if you have any queries, please do not hesitate to send me a message, and I will reply to you ASAP. And that's the chapter 1. Chapter 2 talks about Adam and Eve, creation of the garden, and Eve. So here we see one important thing. There is a lots of contrasting accounts between the creation story in chapter 1 and chapter 2. In fact, chapter 2 complements chapter 1, whereas chapter 1 says the Genesis chapter 1 to Genesis chapter 2 tells all the 7 days, whereas chapter 2 focuses only on the 6th day, that is the creation of Adam and Eve and the garden, and you read about the tree of life and knowledge of good and evil. And chapter 3 we read about the fall of man, the temptation, where Eve falls into that, and how they were punished and they were sent out from the garden. That is what we read in chapter 3. One of the things mostly people ask is why the fruit is the apple. Well, the ideal fruit mentioned in the passage was apple could have come from the similarity of the Latin word malum. Malum means apple, or malum means evil. So could have been the translation. There's whatever the fruits are. I want you to concentrate on the conversation between Eve and Satan, how Satan convinces Eve to eat the fruit. Satan creates a doubt, then asks question, gets the answer, and then makes Eve, gives the desire to eat the fruit. So I want you to read the conversation very clearly. That will give you an insight. So that brings us to the Old Testament, coming to the New Testament, book of Matthew, chapter 1. Well, you all know the Synoptic Gospels, or Matthew, Mark, and Luke, I've explained to you. So optics means having a view. Synops means interaction or seeing a single thing. So synoptic, having a same point of view, is called Synoptic Gospels. So Matthew, Mark, and Luke is uniquely portrayed. So now Matthew, the name means gift of Yahweh. We all know he was a tax collector. In Luke chapter 5 verses 27 to 32, we read about that, and he was one of the 12 apostles, as we mentioned in Matthew chapter 10 verses 3. He's one of the 12 apostles. So there is ample of chances that Matthew was present in most of the miracles and events that happened during the life of Jesus. What there are 70 times Matthew refers the Old Testament, which means to say this book was targeted or written to the Jewish community. So for the Jews, the Old Testament was very, very important. So he was always referring to the Old Testament. So like what you call, there are out of 15 parables and 20 miracles that are mentioned in all the Gospels. 10 of the parables and 3 miracles are only mentioned in the book, Gospel of Matthew. So I repeat again, there are 20 miracles and 15 parables, out of which 10 parables and 3 miracles are mentioned only in the Gospel of Matthew. I'm not going to give a detailed account of that. I will tell you as it goes, because if I'm going to list out everything, then we will run out of time. So as I promised, I will try to keep it within 15 minutes, the introduction. So Matthew, since he addresses to the Jewish community, he wants to establish the truth that Jesus was from the lineage of David. He was a descendant of David. So he gives, he starts his gospel with a genealogy. A genealogy, in olden days, they used to keep a genealogy, a record of the people, so their fathers and the son and everything. So accordingly, he gives a genealogy from Abraham to Joseph, the entire genealogy, and it follows by the birth of Jesus. That is, Joseph having a dream, as he was betrothed to Mary. He finds out Mary is pregnant, so he, being a just man, wants to separate her without anyone knowing. But angel of the Lord appears to him, and he marries Mary. So I want you to concentrate on this genealogy. Why read genealogy? There are very, very important reasons to it. There are 5 women's names mentioned in the genealogy. One is Tamara, Rahab, Ruth, Uriah's wife. You know who is Uriah's wife, and Mary. So we are reading about, as we come into this instance, when we read about Tamara, Rahab, and Ruth, and Uriah, and Mary, and everyone, I will explain to you when God interferes the particular people's life, how he can use these people mightily in his divine salvation to his lineage. So now, that is Gospel of Matthew chapter 1. So I want you to read Genesis chapter 1, 2, and 3, and Matthew chapter 1. So that brings us to the first day devotion, and tomorrow we will be reading 4th, 5th, and 6th chapter of chapters of Genesis, and the 2nd chapter of Gospel of Matthew. So before I finish, don't forget to subscribe and also click the bell. And if please pass this on, this link to all your friends and families and other groups, so that they could be blessed as well. So we have more followers, and it will be a very interesting journey as brothers and sisters together to complete this devotion in 1 year, to read the complete Bible. So I will meet you tomorrow through my YouTube channel. Stay blessed and see you tomorrow. Bye bye.